So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mark Parry, and I'm hosting this presentation today from the Leeds Civic Trust. We have with us Rachael Unsworth, and she's fascinated by the long-term evolution of cities. As a part-time lecturer in urban geography at the University of Leeds from 1994 to 2013, her course is about cities and sustainability always drew on Leeds as the example on the doorstep. She has researched city living, inner city regeneration, and the history of the office district, as well as contributing to forward thinking on planning, urban design, development, housing, and environment in Leeds. Rachael was co-writer and editor of 21st Century Leeds, Geographies of a Regional City in 2004. A guidebook covering the city centre followed in 2008. In 2019, she started Leeds City Walking Talks, leading many different tours for a wide range of clients. She was also a trustee of the Leeds Civic Trust from 2008 to 2016. So if you have any questions, please use the question and answer facility, not the chat. And we'll have a very short period at the end just to pick out a few questions to present to Rachael. Otherwise, I'll hand over to her now. So welcome, Rachael, and thank you for doing that.
Hello, everybody. And I hope that some of you at least were able to catch Steve Burt's presentation a few weeks back. And now I'm going to pick up where he left off. I'm doing this talk wearing at least 3 hats, as a resident and a member of the neighbourhood forum here in the heart of Chapel Allerton, and as Marcus said, as a tour guide, and then also to do this the latter part of the book. Steve's had by far the lion's share of the work so far, all those centuries he's covered, and I'm hopping in on the most recent material, and then topping and tailing and helping with the editing overall and liaising with the graphic designer. What a project, fantastic. So this is what I'm going to try to cover today, and we'll go back and forward in time and try to just give you a sense of how it all fits together in time and space. On the right here, you can see the typical quarry marks on the local sandstone made by the Hare Hills quarrymen, this checkerboard effect. Very local and very ancient, of course. So Steve started with this beautiful map from very early Victorian times, showing you the township of Leeds surrounded by the 10 out townships. You may say, oh, there were 11, but this bit didn't apparently count. So up here, we have the out township of Chapel Allerton. There's Chapel Allerton itself. So you see it's a much wider area. The current Leeds, by the way, it went way beyond this borough/parish boundary of medieval times. It became the borough boundary. Next year it'll be 400 years since then. And now Leeds is about 6 times the total area, but we're not going to go into that today. So we're going to zoom in fact, on this particular area, and you see what I've called the kernels of the old settlement areas. And the vast majority of the area still being rural, with here an outpost of Kirkstall Abbey, which Steve has been very interested in, and showing how this whole area developed in agricultural terms over those long centuries. So this is how it looks now, a very sort of low-grade street plan approach to doing the mapping, but just so you can see the same boundary imposed on today's street plan. And then we're going to overlay it with the current ward boundaries used for administering the place now, and you'll see doesn't really fit as such. It's just this bit that wriggles along by Meanwood Beck that starts as Adel Beck and then goes on to be Sheepscare Beck and so on. But all the rest of it is higgledy-piggledy compared with the old boundary. So covers the whole of the Moortown ward, a bit of Alwoodley, a bit of Chapel Allerton, and a bit of the Roundhay ward here. When I did a presentation about Chapel Allerton over 4 years ago, I tried with this mosaic of housing types to give a sense of the diversity of the area, and that's just in this core in the middle of little old Chapel A. But now we're going to try to fling the boundary right out and cover this whole area, if not in exhaustive detail. It won't be exhaustive detail. Even a small sub-area of one city, you can have so much detail, but we're going to try and keep it so that it's a high-level story that gives you the main thrusts of change and an overall sense of the diversity and what happens here today. So this is not even anywhere near a sort of representative sample. And we're looking at an area that I can't emphasize too much just how rural it was for so long, still some farms into the 20th century. And then back in the 17th and certainly very significantly in the 18th century, richer people able to afford to buy land and build themselves quite a fine house. Many of them did so. And then that enabled later folk to come along and develop within the bounds of those old properties. But then other land parcels were sold as well, and we've had subdivision, infill and general densification, and it's become increasingly appealing over time. So it's now very much a sought after area, as the estate agents would say. It has its origins, this name of Chapel Allerton, in the fact that the parish church is a long way down the hill, 2.5 miles and 300 feet in altitude difference. Okay to get there for morning service on a Sunday, but a bit of hard work to come back. So they pled for a chapel of ease, and it used to stand here in what's still the old churchyard. And it served for many centuries, was rebuilt and then extended and repaired and so on. Eventually, it couldn't be made good any longer, and they made the bold decision to create a new church. So this is where the old chapel was that became St Matthew's Church during the 19th century. This field had been given by a parishioner for a vicarage, actually, but it was then used as the place for the new church. Strangely not aligned exactly east-west, but aligned onto Wood Lane. A minor point. And there it is, St Matthew's, one of the buildings that does have a famous architect, the go-to Gothic architect of the later Victorian period, G.F. Bodley. This is what it looks like inside. Very fine indeed. And there are 3 other churches as such across this whole area: Holy Trinity in Meanwood, St John's up just beyond the Ring Road, and St Edmund's in Roundhay. And then there are other places of worship as well. So I hope to be able to include a complete sort of listing of current and former places of worship, and then what those former places have become now. So all part of the evolution of the area. As is the story of these quite significant houses, the different sizes, not all of them with extensive grounds, but many of them did have huge areas of land around them. And so you can see a couple of examples on the right here. Lots of people jockeying to be top house, Allerton this, Allerton that. And then there are a lot more, by the way, just over the boundary down into Potter Newton, and then several more as you're over towards Roundhay. So this, if I've missed any obvious ones within the old township area, I'm sure somebody will let me know. Here we've got Leafield just tipping over the edge down towards the Ring Road. and Allerton Hill, one of a series of villa developments within the core of Chapel Allerton that has then been used as an institution. Many of these places have gone through a period in institutional use, and then most of them are now subdivided or in some other use. And then a few, perhaps surprisingly few, have been completely lost, and the grounds have been built over in some way. Allerton House, which you may not think you know of, well, you probably know Aldi. That's on that site now. We still have, outlined in orange here, houses that still have the lodge in existence nearby, where the premises join the road that gives access to the property. And then the other ones included here are where the main house has gone, and there are some more across the area as well. This whole area looked like this back in 1850. Steve has shown you how the farming landscape evolved, and we've got quite a lot of detail on the ownership of these land parcels, and especially at particular points in history, and a couple of sources in the 19th century, really helpful. And you can see relatively few roads in the area. And so there was a tendency for early development to be along existing roads. Why would you build a road if you didn't need to? So people snapping up good sites along the existing thoroughfares and then filling it with extra roads and to give further access and to create the pattern we have now. So you can see that's thickening up a bit by, over 50 years later. If I just flash between the two, you can see quite a lot of extra woodland as well, or at least the cartographers decided to include it. And now if we go to 1950, quite a lot of suburbanization happening, large-scale developments, and if not completely filled in, then certainly on the way to becoming a much more dense pattern. By 1970, that represents an enormous amount of building within the 50 years since the First World War. And I just outlined with a triangle the small number of tower blocks that we have within the area. You'll see that Meanwood Hall, by the way, was still in institutional use at that time as a kind of hospital. And then this is the pattern today. You've already seen this map, just to help you to keep your sense of where we are. And then also to remind you of what it looked like back in 1850. So this not very long period of history to develop from mostly agricultural to pretty well built out, apart from a few green spaces that are woodland, playing fields, local parks, and school premises. And this, to remind you, is the pattern of the wards. So it's very hard to give you the population figures all the way through because of these boundary changes. We can't compare like with like, but what we can see is the steady uptick in population during the 19th century. And then here, at the point where the corporation, as it used to be called, now we call it the council, took over the trams, the prices came down, and then they were electrified. Boom, boom, the real ingredients for suburbanization at scale. So we have some Victorian terraces and Edwardian terraces, and then much more development to come. Trams sadly only lasted till 1959, but by that time we already had very dense development up here. And this is one of the so-called the Hawthorns in the grounds of Hawthorne House. It's just over 200 years old. This is where I am right now, in the old coach house of Hawthorne House. And it was sold in the late 19th century. It had been owned by John Barron, by the way. Very astute. And he obviously knew that there was potential for this substantial south-facing garden that went right down to where the old chapel was. And sure enough, here are the 4 through terraces that were created in that land. And just here on the corner, as you're walking along Regent Street, you will notice a little bit of old stone wall, and that will have been the corner of our garden wall all that time ago. But you see how tightly we were cut off. The tiniest bit of south-facing garden you ever did see. And that's just to put it in a wider context. There's Hawthorne House and the Hawthorns, but still loads of people giving on to fields in the early 20th century. Now, one of the houses that was quite early on subject to substantial change was the Chapel Allerton Hall territory. Back in the 1970s, this was a comment from the local residents' association. They said that it was in the unfortunate position of providing space for people moving up from town. Well, people have to live somewhere, and this land was always going to be appealing as the population grew even more. So here's a little excerpt from the 1920 OS. You can see the very extensive grounds here, and the boundary actually goes through here, but we'll forget about that for the time being and just show you this is the number of houses that were developed on that land, called Little Canada or the Canadian Estate, because the Baron son who inherited and was dealing with the land sale was married to a Canadian. There's no more reason to it than that. And you see here, Gledhow Park Drive, that's the edge of one land ownership and the beginning of another. And this literally is the drive to Gledhow Hall, one of the ways of getting to the hall off the turnpike. In 1930, a Yorkshire Post advertisement that Steve Burt has turned up through the National British Newspaper Archives. Look at the prices. From less than 100 years ago. And that's what this rather fuzzy satellite image looks like now. A green area, but with a lot of housing, but at much lower densities than was the case with the old houses that people had moved from down in town. This is another example of Gledhow Hall, and now with a range of private and public sector housing in what had been the garden. A much denser, extensive woodland. There's the example of Meanwood Hall. Sorry about the fuzzy map. The OS sheet that I've got just cuts off here. So I thought, well, I'll just use this rather bad one but the wonderful resource of the National Library of Scotland that has its map archive that you can dip into. So you can see here's Meanwood Hall. Now, this is a rare example of actually a historic property that still hasn't found a new use at the moment, awaiting being regenerated. This is one of those confusingly named properties. It used to be another Allerton Hall over here near the Roundhay boundary. And it later became known as Roundhay Hall. Scarcely less ambiguous because there's Roundhay this, that and the other as well. But this is now the core of what's the Spire Hospital site. So there's that building. Here's the development of the hospital and then housing in the grounds as well. I hear from a friend who used to work in urban design in the city council, who's now a volunteer helping to do some rewilding of this bit of the grounds here. And that's what it looks like from the south side now, with a porte cochère on the west side. And here's the undistinguished looking late 20th century building. A very distinguished architect was the designer of this curious phenomenon. Meanwood House later became known as Meanwood Towers, no longer has some of its more teeteringly tall bits, but is now in a very different setting. This was by Pugin, by the way, famous Gothicist, very much one of the people responsible for the take-up of neo-Gothicism in the 19th century. And it's now hemmed into this development here. And this is one of the Meanwood Towers developments of the late 1920s. Look here, £550 for one of those houses. And on a smaller scale, and there are many examples of this across the patch, of not quite such grand houses with really extensive grounds, but, you know, with gardens big enough to develop. So this is just on Shadwell Lane, towards the northern edge of the old township area. Really large-scale suburbanisation was on the march in the interwar period, as slum clearance at scale got underway. There was very little slum clearance before the First World War, and just 36 council houses before the First World War. And so this section is about the extension of private suburban dwellings and also the extension of council housing to be a really significant part of satisfying demand for improved housing conditions. Here's Scott Hall Road, the new road of the interwar period, snaking up through this part of North Leeds. Still lots of fields. And here's Stonebeck Road here. Such was the extent of semi-detached development during this period that it means that it's still, just by a whisker, the commonest built form in the whole country. Well, back in 2017 anyway. And we've had some modern versions more recently, so maybe it still just is. But during the interwar period, 70% of development of housing was private sector. And as the Yorkshire Post said in December 1924, owner occupation is probably the best and surest safeguard against the follies of socialism. Famously conservative paper. And this was building at 10 or 12 houses to the acre, compared with 50 or even up to 75 houses per acre when the back-to-backs were being built. And there were nearly 75,000 back-to-backs by 1930. And around 34,000 of those were at least 60 years old. Now, they were available for these to us now incredibly decent prices, from anywhere from 550 to about twice that for the larger ones, and the better spots, I suppose, as well. 1,100, that seems to be the top sort of price that Steve's turned up in the newspaper archives. And we want to get more information on this, including from still existing building firms. A lot of employment in the interwar years must have been building these private sector and then the public sector housing. And there's the Scott Hall Road disappearing seemingly to infinity in both directions, lined with semis, mostly semis, all the way up. And here's Scott Hall Road arriving at the roundabout where it meets Harrogate Road and Stonegate Road, and then the new ring road, outer ring road, and then the suburbanisation carrying on with the field after field succumbing to bricks and mortar in so many different styles. If I were a collector, a determined collector of all the typologies of semi-detached, North Leeds is a happy hunting ground. It would run into many, many pictures if I was to give you a complete rundown, but I will spare you that. This is just earlier. This is a typical sort of 1930s style, very different from the older ones, just a bit further back along Wensley Drive. And here, more types with the front doors sometimes at the outer edges, sometimes together in the middle, you know, different kinds of complexions. And here we have, I have just made a pilgrimage to the Burt family house. His father was able to move out to a new house in the middle of the 1950s, and Steve grew up there. So this is what the terrain looked like back in 1950. Still empty gaps here. This is it today. And there's the location of the house, is just down here. Huh. And this is the sort of advertisement that Mr. Burt Sr. must have been drawn to. Georgian semi-villa. and people able to get mortgages. And these were the repayment terms, 17 shillings. Less than £1 a week. We have some patches of bungalows with the somewhat aptly named Sunset Road up in Meanwood, and Highmoor Crescent. It is actually a crescent, although it looks straight as a die. It goes up and then round and back again towards the north side of the edge of the area. And then we have the local authority estates here and there, Miles Hill, and then the more recent Beckhill estate. And then next to that, what's just recently been developed, that still shows it as a development site, private sector housing called Vision at Meanwood. And across the area, different kinds of council housing, some of these low-rise flats in various configurations, just half a dozen literally of tower blocks with 60 flats to a block, and then many crescents and approaches and other kinds of forms of these sorts of houses. Short terraces, some of them look like houses, but they're actually blocks of 4 flats that look just the same as semis. And then here and there, these so-called parades of shops, many of which are no longer shops as such. Some services, some, I think this must have been a parade of shops. I'm sure I'll be corrected if not. This seems to have been a recent change following on from the permitted development rights, but I need to check that. And then a rare phenomenon for this part of town, a redevelopment where there were slums demolished here, little old cottages that nowadays I'm sure would have been regenerated, probably would change hands now for eye-watering sums, but they were cleared away along with a total of about 200 cottages were cleared in the middle of Chapel Allerton, and the Town Street area was rebuilt, an award-winning scheme, as it's always called, and quite novel in that it was not permitting cars to go down between the main thoroughfares of housing. So, and then we have all sorts of developments coming in, some gaps in that period as well. This is in the grounds of Allerton Hall, by the way, that you can just see in the background there. Maybe you'll have walked along Steinbeck Lane, noticed the flats, not even noticed this very interesting old house that we're going to cover in some detail in the book. And then we've got later private sector housing. This is the stuff down at Vision at Meanwood. And a modern take on the semi-detached. So just to remind you of the way in which all of this is layered up over time, here's the map from back at the late 19th century. And then somebody got out the pens and updated it in the middle of the 20th century. You can see there how many new roads were made, how many houses that must account for. You could do some really boring counting. I'm not sure I've got the time to do that, but I think the maps tell the story. And then by 1954, you see almost complete infill, but not quite. This is where, in 1954, the Burt house wasn't there, and it was just about to be built. For the central area of Chapel Allerton, we were able to do this quite intricate dating of the buildings. We can't do it for the whole area. We haven't got access to the same data anymore. But anyway, to reproduce this kind of really fine detail at the scale of the whole of the township area would be too much for a book. But it's rather nice to have had this, at least for this complex area in the heart of Chapel Allerton, which was the most substantial of the pre-modern settlement areas. And thinking of the historic buildings, yes, quite a number of them are listed, perhaps not as many as you might imagine. There are 40 or so in the core area of Chapel A itself, and I will do a proper listing of the listing across the whole area. One of our most notable buildings in the centre here is from the very early 20th century. Gets to be on my patch, as it were, chronologically, from 1904. And W.H. Thorpe was a prominent architect in the city centre as well, did the medical school of the 1890s, Oxford Place Chapel, and more besides. We still have the library, one of only 2 across the old township areas, another one up at Moortown. And then we have quite a number of buildings just local to here by this partnership, brief as it was, cut short by the premature death of young Kitson, who was a younger son of the famous engine maker. Bedford was a younger son of the famous dye works people. So they were not having to go off and run Dad's factory. They were able to become architects. And they were bringing the styling of southern England up to Leeds, having studied with practices in the south. And so we've got a number of examples here. These 2 at the bottom after Bedford's death. And as well as the specific listed buildings, we also have conservation areas, the entirety of which are subject to some special considerations when it comes to alterations and new build, particularly needing anything new to not to compromise the quality and character of the area. This one is rather different because it's mostly about the treatment of that woodland area along the sides of Gledhow Beck. And we do still have these patches of old dwellings along or just off the main roads. And then here and there, what are referred to rather dryly as non-designated heritage assets. And no doubt you know of some other examples near where you live, and we'd be interested to gather more of these quirky, unique elements to make our places unique. Make our places, the sort of things that we value. So there we have the past, and now going forward into the future across this area, Moortown and bits of Alwoodley, Chapel Allerton and Roundhay. I've got some very interesting information here, and I'm indebted to my friend Steve Carver, geographer, for pulling this through on master map. So all the structures that were in existence in 2007 have a unique code, and then any changes are then given a unique code. So you can switch layers on and off. So here we've got the complete set of all the information, and I'm going to go into more detail so that you can see the richness of this data. So this is part of Gledhow, and all the yellow bits were structures that were already in existence in 2007, and indeed most of this long before. This is, suburbanization of the mid-20th century. And then the red is new building, and the blue is the extensions. And oh my, what a number of extensions there have been. Between 2007 and 2025, already over 10,000 countable little separate rectangular blue patches. And some of them referring to individual dwellings. So quite a number of examples you see as you walk around the area of extensions upwards, lots of velexes, and extra dormers in roofs, if not at the front, then at the back, and then sideways extensions, sometimes turning little old garages into dwellable rooms, and then everything from porch areas being, glazed in at least, through to quite substantial extra space at the side, at the back, above. So really quite a lot of building work has gone on and does go on. I mean, you see quite a lot of white vans and scaffolding as you walk around. There's still substantial change and densification, more and more square meters per unit area, but still a lot of gardens, tree-lined streets and so on. And instead of moving, this is what people tend to do. So here you've got really dense amount of extensions and new structures slotted in. Here's the vision at Meanwood, new development, but not so many new developments. You wonder what's going to happen with the stipulation that we're to have 1.5 million new dwellings by 2029, whether there's going to be even more development pressure here, or whether really it's all going to be rather intricate extra densification. Here's a part of Moortown. This is Moortown Park, but the old Yorkshire Bank playing fields were not completely built on. It was a very strong wish on the part of locals that they should retain an area of that for public amenity. And they succeeded after long struggles, it turns out. So now we've had people in this area. Before I came to live here, I've only been here just about 10 years. There were a number of my neighbours who got together to try to make improvements, including creating Seven and the Chapel Allerton Festival that happens every September, and to try to gather information and think about how to further improve the area. They did a survey in 2008. And these were positive elements that they found, much of which is the same sorts of things as people say today and what the estate agents would say about Chapel Allerton. And then there were some negative points that were made, and particularly about heavy and increasing volume of traffic, and I would add speed as well, and the associated danger and pollution. And back then, they were concerned about these other problems as well. Now, there have been changes, and there's been improvement in the retail offer and the streetscape, and certainly less antisocial behaviour in the core of Chapel Allerton. There's still some problems with crime, and we've still got challenges, not least because it's become an increasingly appealing place, the problem of affordability. But we have had some improvement in streetscape. So this plan eventually came to fruition. And now we have this area called the village square, of paving and seating, and where the cafes can spill out onto that nice south-facing paving, and where we can hold periodic markets. But we still have some aspirations into the future. And some of us recently got together, well, a few years ago now, continuing this idea of a neighbourhood forum to try to create a neighbourhood plan. We've done a lot of work under these headings, brought together quite a lot of material to understand the area. We've done a bit more consultation as well, tried to draw other people in. But I'm afraid that we've run out of steam on the neighbourhood plan. For a number of reasons. If you feel strongly that it should continue, then I'd welcome other people coming in and taking on some of the effort. Our reasons for having put it on hold, at least, is because we were rather upset by the way that the proposals for reducing the amount of through traffic were treated by so many locals. It seemed a very disappointing approach to trying to make it a safer, less polluted and pleasanter place. We were allocated a very strangely shaped area for the plan. I've given a couple of presentations about the neighbourhood plan stuff, so I'm not going over all the detail of that again today. And it was a very slow process to get the stats out of the City Council that related to that strange shaped area that we were given. There were still so many stages ahead, because although it's meant to be a relatively straightforward process, there just are a lot of hurdles and we've still had quite a number of things that we would have had to do. And then we were also aware that there was going to be an election, and there was, and new policy is still being shaped up. So one way and another, I'm afraid it's still on hold. But the bunch of us who were enthusiastically involved were extremely strongly minded to take these topics seriously and to try to make provision in the neighbourhood plan that going forward, these kinds of issues would be thoroughly addressed in any sorts of changes. Now, I've still got a lot of work to do for the book, and it includes drawing together the evidence of what other neighbourhood groups have done and are doing and want to do in future. And there's a lot of stuff going on. It's fantastic. So that's a work in progress as well. And I want to be able to give good summaries across all these different topics, and drawing on still a number of sources that I haven't thoroughly tapped. Steve's done huge work with the archives, but there's still quite a lot that we can add for the most recent decades. You'll notice that I've deliberately labelled this beautiful picture from Gledhow Valley Woods, wood and trees, determined that we're going to draw out clear threads from what could be an over-complex and over-detailed story. But I would like to suggest that some of you listening now might be a further source of information, just as back in 2019 and 20, I was indebted to locals for lending me material and coming forward with information about dates of houses. Some people have lent me deeds. And I need to interview a number of local residents with long experience, both as residents and perhaps running businesses here. And as well as community volunteers, and also the politicians who may have served in the past or still be serving now. So there's a lot still to do potentially, to get a really strong handle and to be able to cut and slice the information appropriately. I'd also like to be able to update using census data. For instance, this was one of the detailed maps we were able to include in our book back in 2004, and this is the area that we're covering. And I'd like to be able to update that map for the Indian population and other subsets of our now much more diverse population. This is just the Google map, but we'd like to be able to map the main community facilities. There are now very few post offices and so on across the whole area. And on top of that map giving the details of the built environment, we've got the publicly accessible green space, which is a great thing to be able to have. So that excludes the playing fields around schools that are closed to the public after hours and so on. It excludes private grounds and sports fields that aren't generally open, but it includes the woodlands and the community parks and so on. And here we are on the edge of Roundhay Park, but that's all beyond our area as such, but obviously very much an amenity for people who live here. And then another aspect of the green space, but a great amenity for those who do have an allotment, but they're not open to the public. Here we've got the map of the tree preservation orders. I just thought I'd add this in, and a reminder that especially if you live within a conservation area, all the trees need to be treated with respect. And who would think that we're still within the boundary of a big city? We're not even out in the countryside area beyond the, into the green belt. This is within the urban area. We're so lucky to have these green spaces. And that I have borrowed from a Meanwood-based group. And it would be great to have an up-to-date coverage of parts of the area. So one of the elements that it would be lovely to have your help with is, do you know anybody who has a drone or who could be engaged at a reasonable fee to take some pictures on a fine day? Do get in touch with me. That's my email, just leedscitywalkingtours@gmail.com. And this, by the way, is just my thing about, the standard issue privet hedge. Great for privacy, but they can be hard to keep under control, can't they? And there's a lot of this. Obviously, people still struggling with their standard issue mid-20th century hedges. Now, here's Steve Burt, one of his favourite tasks, which is finding gems in the archives. And he was full of joy to find a very, very useful source there. He's amazing. And we work very well together, and we've got a lot still ahead of us. And I've got a very busy summer ahead, but I have put in a few public tours. I've scheduled these. There are still a few places left for rooftop leads on spring evenings. And I've scheduled this one, and I will copy it and put this one up for the following day, working in partnership with Leads for Europe. We haven't yet scheduled, this is a joint venture with Simon Jenkins, who knows a lot more about beer than I do. We both seem to enjoy drinking it. And I've done work on also the opposite of the booziness of Leeds, which is the temperance side. So we're going to do a whole day, where you can either come just for the morning, just the afternoon, or be with us for the whole day. And I think we've got the road closure again in the middle of July. So I will do a tour and put the proceeds into the coffers of the Friends of Gledhow Valley Woods. And then in June, I've been asked to do a tour of Quarry Hill as part of the summer celebrations for the Civic Trust. So if you'd like to ask me anything, I'm sure Mark will be able to give you a chance to put your questions if you've put them in the
Yeah, there's no questions as such yet.
all right.
But people, the audience, please do think of something now.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I noticed was there's quite a variety of housing. Am I right in assuming the sort of population density similar to most other areas of Leeds, or does it have its own slant to being more dense or less dense?
Well, this is what I need to find out from the census. You know, we need to look in detail at the census 21. And the trouble is that the information is given only at quite an aggregate level. You can make some comparisons, but the stuff that's easily publicly available is only a limited number of characteristics. And so ideally, I need extra help on mining the census and doing comparisons over time as well. So I wouldn't want to produce this without having done that work. But I haven't got the skills myself or access to the necessary data. So it's something that really needs attention urgently. So a very good question.
Right. We have one from Clive Woods. Do you have any problems recently with external shutters and high wooden fences,
Oh,
both spoiling the landscape?
oh, well, high wooden fences. Yeah, well, not too many as you go around. No, the bigger problem, I think, and it's something that I talked about when I did my presentation that was specifically on the neighbourhood planning issues, is the paving over of front gardens. There is guidance from the City Council. I could have put that up actually as another slide. I could go forward in this, but I don't want to mess up the recording of it. But there is some guidance, and because of the problem of very heavy rainfall suddenly running off into the drainage system and causing, peak flood problems downstream, it really does matter that so many front gardens are getting paved over for car parking, hard surfacing that's impermeable. And that is a bigger menace, I think, than the visual intrusion of high fences. So please, if you're thinking of creating more car parking space, do it in a way that's still permeable. There are lots of good ideas given within the online guidance from the City Council, and it doesn't have to be more expensive, and you can still fit your cars on, but in a way that's compatible with nature and won't add to the downstream flooding problem.
Yeah, and it's always frustrating to see cars parked in the road and on pavements and not making use of existing driveways.
Well, it is, but it has to be said that a lot of the houses were built at a time when, well, the powers that be thought, well, it's unlikely that people living in these small semi-detached houses would become rich enough to be car owners.
Yes,
And as you go around, you see that so many of the garages that were provided are now not big enough for modern, fat cars. Yeah, people end up parking on verges, half on pavements. It's a bit of a menace. If we had better, more reliable public transport,
absolutely.
fewer cars would be needed. I know quite a number of older households decide to get rid of one of their cars at least, and that is a help if people can do that. And of course, if you look at the economics of it, you could go more or less anywhere by Uber at the drop of a hat these days, or hire a car when you need one for much less than the capital cost and the running costs of having a car. I speak as somebody who is very lucky to have been able to effect my preference for living very close to the bus routes. And I'm fit enough to walk, so I'm very lucky, I know.
Right, there's no more questions. So I think it leaves me to say thank you very much, Rachel. It was very interesting. And thank you to the audience for tuning in and listening.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I hope to hear from some of you. leedscitywalkingtours@gmail.com. If you've got any other suggestions, questions, information. Oh, there's a nice little thumbs up traveling up my screen there. Very nice. Thank you. Oh,
Okay.
and a heart and another thumbs up and another. Oh, lots of thumbs up and clapping coming up the screen. That's really nice. Oh, I want to capture this. I've just done a screen grab of all. That's lovely. Oh, thank you. I had good wishes from my English daughter on Mothering Sunday, but my American daughter, well, is probably busy with the little ones still quite early in the day. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye for now, and see you again soon.
Okay, thank you and goodbye.